Hey everyone, welcome back. Again, my name is Jesse, and this is part 2 of our This or That series. In part 1, we talked about how we have a choice to choose to live for the kingdom of God or for the kingdom of self. That choice runs against our culture and kind of the natural pull of our world, and it comes at a cost, and that cost is persecution. But I left you off with a reminder that blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So this week in our This or That, we're going to wrap it up and we're going to look at the story of the wise and foolish builder that comes at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And we're going to dive into a deeper look at choice and why our choices matter. But first I want to talk about big implications. I don't know about you, but making decisions can be really hard for me. I make a lot in my job and what I do every day. And so sometimes my brain just gets clogged with I don't want to decide anything. And when I think about decisions and making big decisions, I think there are kind of 3 types of choices that we all make every day. So let's look at those 3 things. The first one is small or mundane choices. These are the jeans or shorts, socks and sandals, or just sandals, or just socks. It's either more homework or that next episode on Netflix. It can be coffee or tea, Coke or Red Bull, or even pancakes or waffles. These are the small choices that we make every single day that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. The second one is medium or personal choices. These might be choosing your classes at school, or eventually where you might want to work, or the style of clothing that you dress in, or doing your homework or not doing your homework. These kinds of choices have a personal impact on you, but it's limited to you. It tends not to bleed over into other people. That's the third choice, large or community choices. Think of post-secondary, or maybe eventually your boyfriend, girlfriend, or who you're going to marry. One day maybe having kids, your job location. These are family relationship stuff. These are big implications that bleed out past you. Every single day we make small, medium, and large choices. However, sometimes we have to respond to choices that others make that have big implications in our lives. I mentioned last time we got together that I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and then my parents had got a divorce when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I ended up going to live with my dad, and my mom stayed where she was. But she got in trouble with the law, and a couple years after my parents separated, my mom actually skipped the country and took off to Mexico to avoid the law. For 2 years, no one heard from her. No one knew where she would be. And then we got a couple of letters, and we were kind of there was some contact, but then again, there was another year or so where we knew nothing. In 1999, my grad year, yes, I'm old, my mom and I had a conversation on the phone for 45 minutes, and it was great. We talked about all kinds of things. What I didn't know then, that I know now in hindsight, is that would be the last time me or anyone else in my family would talk to her for 10 years. There was no contact, nothing. For 10 years, we did not know if she was alive or dead. My mom made some really hard choices that had a huge impact on my life. And not every choices that are made have such a big impact, but all choices have implications. So I want you to turn to your small group or somebody around you, or if you're watching this online or on your own, I want you to think about this question and then talk about it with somebody that you trust. So here's the question. What are some of the choices you've made that have had a big impact in your life? Okay, one more time. What are some of the choices you've made that had a big impact in your life? Okay, go talk. Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope that was a good conversation. And like I said, we're gonna dive into the last part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We started with the Beatitudes, and there's a bunch of stuff in between, and then there's the story of the wise and foolish builder. I want to read the story for you, and then we're going to kind of back up a little bit. So here's the story, the wise and foolish builder, Matthew 7, verses 24 to 27. Again, if you've got a Bible, grab it, bring it out, or you can just follow along on the screen. So here's the story. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And the rains fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house. And it fell. And great was the fall of it. Like I said, this is the end of this long speech. In your Bible, it takes a couple chapters to kind of get there, but in reality, it was Jesus on the side of a mountain with thousands of people gathered around him, speaking in one big long go. And they just loved it. They just ate it up. Matthew even writes this, that when Jesus finished saying these things, the crowds were astonished at his teachings, for he was teaching them as someone who had authority, not as their scribes. So what are some of the other things that Jesus actually said? We don't have time to go through all of this stuff, but I kind of thought I'd make a quick little list for you of kind of all the things that kind of get covered in the Beatitudes. So section 1, kind of where we started, Jesus needs to be your center. He really talks about the fact that it's salt and light, that Jesus fulfills the law, that Jesus is the center of the story. Then we jump into a section where the bar gets raised. He talks about anger and lust and divorce and oaths and retaliation and loving your enemies and giving to the needy. He says things like, even having lustful thoughts about somebody is actually like adultery, or being angry with somebody is actually like murder. This bar is raised. Then he goes into a section about the fact that we have access to the Father, and this is where we find the Lord's Prayer. In section 4, we remember that Jesus is our provider. There's conversations about the fact that there's the golden rule and false prophets. And again, that Jesus wants to know who you are, that Jesus is the center of the story. And then we get to this last spot where the choice is yours. All these things, Jesus is essentially asking this or that. He's raising the bar, and he's constantly coming back to this idea that we can't do it. It's the same thing we talked about last week, that we can't do it ourselves, but in Jesus, all this is possible. And the question he's building to is this: what kind of life do you want to build? What kind of life do you want to build? And then he shares these 2 building stories. So let's dive into these stories and take a closer look at them. Okay, let's look at the first builder, the rock. So we've got the first builder, and he builds his house. Now, when I think house, I don't want you to think, your physical house, your 4 doors, the 4 walls that make up your home, your townhouse, your big house, your small house, your bedrooms. That's not the kind of house we're talking about here. We're talking about your life. We're talking about your friends, your family, the people you go to school with every day, your best friend, your worst enemy, the person you share a locker with or wait at the bus stop for, places if you have a job, the people you work with, all these small, medium, and large choices that we make. We're talking about all of those things. When we think house, we need to think life in this analogy. And then he builds his house on the rock. In the ancient world, you wanted to build your house on a piece of rock or a firm piece of land, because what happens is the houses were really big and really heavy, and if you built it on anything else, a lot of marshlands are going on, especially in Israel, and it would sink. And so you wanted this thing to be on a firm foundation. We do the exact same thing here now. We pour concrete and we make a firm foundation for our homes as a concrete slab that our houses are built on top of. And then the rains fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat against the house. Now, just like the house one on life, I don't want you to think water. I don't want you to think rain and storm and hurricane, although hurricane might get pretty close. I want you to think disasters in life. I want you to think about your parents getting a divorce or the death of a friend or a family member. I want you to think about broken hearts, boyfriend, girlfriend breaking up, failed grades, rejection. I want you to think about bullying. I want you to think about the loss of a friend or getting caught up in gossip. I want you to think about the hard things. This is the hard things kind of moment. But the house did not fall because it has been built on the foundation of the rock. Don't think rock, think Jesus. And on that rock, you will be blessed. Okay, let's look at the sand now. So, the second builder builds his house. So, life, again, exact same thing we just talked about, all your friends, family, your people, all your stuff. Builds his house on sand. Now, when we think sand, I want you to think shifting sand. When you build anything of any weight on sand, it will start to sink. And that idea of shifting sand, it's like this house is intended to be solid, and yet everything is constantly moving. This is really where the kingdom of the world, or maybe our culture, comes into play a little bit more. And it might be a statement like this: what was true today is not necessarily true tomorrow. So I was in junior youth. I've dated myself already once in this series, but I was in junior youth from 1993 to 1995. That's when I was in grade 6, 7, and 8. And back then, in the ancient days, I'm actually not entirely sure we had the internet. I'm sure that it existed somewhere, but I don't remember anything in my life actually having an internet. I didn't have a personal computer in my home for another few years. My phone had a cord connected to the wall, and I remember when we got upgraded to a cordless phone, and it was like the greatest day ever because I could have conversations with my friends not inside of my kitchen with my parents listening to me. And I had a Nintendo, and that thing was rocking 8-bit, and it was 100% not rocking 4K. Culture and the world changed constantly. And then when we build our lives on that kind of shifting sand, it's gonna crumble because it's gonna change. And the rains fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. Again, I want you to think disasters. And it fell, and great was the fall of it. I want you to hear that one more time. And it fell, and great was the fall of it. Jesus tells us there's a difference between these two builders. Everyone who hears these words of mine, the Sermon on the Mount, and does not do them is the difference. And so I want to pause here for a moment. I want to pause because I want to talk about something that is true for both of these builders. I want to talk about the fact that the rains fell and the floods came and the winds blew for both of them. Here's the deal. You're going to have moments in your life that just suck. They're absolutely just horrid and they just suck. But the question is, will you believe in what Jesus has said? So I told you about my mom, and for 10 years we didn't hear from her. I didn't know where she was. And then through a series of circumstances that we don't have time to talk about, I happened to find her in 2008, and we ended up in a conversation on the phone for 60 minutes, and it was the best conversation of my life. It was amazing. I loved every moment of it. The hard part, though, is that I hung up the phone thinking I was gonna have more conversations like that. I had found what was lost. I was so excited. And then we actually never talked again. A couple years later, in 2010, my mom ended up taking her own life in Cabo San Lucas, where she was living at the time. See, the hard part here is that my mom built her life on the sand. And when the waves came and the hard times come and those disasters struck, she got washed away. But for me, when I was 13 years old, I chose to build my life on the rock. And so when this moment came, and so many others like it, these hard moments came and pushed against my life, I had built everything on the rock. I had built myself on the firm foundation. And in that moment with my mom, the words of Jesus rang so true. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. We all have choices to make. Do we heed the words of Jesus and build our life on the rock, or do we choose to build a life on shifting sand? Is it this, or is it that? The Sermon on the Mount raises expectations and reminds us that we can't do it alone, but we've got Jesus. You have a choice to make, and that choice is really simple. Where in your life do you want to build? What kind of life do you want to have? Will it be on the rock, or will it be on the shifting sand? Hey guys, thank you so much for joining me for this series. It's been really great. I hope you have a great small group time. If you've been working through this online on your own, I'd love for you to just work through the questions and share them with somebody that you trust. Thank you so much, and we'll see you guys next time.